Okay, so we are going to focus on two learning objectives this morning. We're going to focus on how do we use Cypress to help feature test front-end applications. Let me get my randomizer out because I want to give a quick quick question to everyone, which is, where are you? Hold on. Whenever I have the Zoom overlay, I can't see half of the things. Colin, okay, can you give me your best description of the difference between a unit test and a feature test?
I just say unit tests like isolates one part of your program, like test one part of your function on your program, like a method or something. And then feature test kind of is holistic and like looks at the whole program together and checks if it works and just has like an intended outcome.
Nice. I like that. You separated, so you made a distinction between like a small part, an isolated part of your program, and then like the whole program together. I like that. Let's go to Rhoda. Do you want to add anything to that? Do you want to challenge anything? What is your understanding of the difference between a unit test and a feature test, Rhoda?
A feature test, would that be like how your test should look in the end? It's more like it's more coupled.
Yeah, I like that because we're going to be using all of our objects together. We don't need to worry so much about keeping them isolated or mocking any dependencies. We use all of our objects together, and that's definitely true. We try and think about like what does done look like, what does success look like for our feature that we're trying to think about. We define that, we codify it in a test. I like that. Let's go to one more, see if we have any other further ideas. Oliver, anything else you want to add or challenge?
That seems like it's covered most of it. I guess just feature test would be about how like the whole program communicates together to get this end result, and then unit test is more just specific classes and functions.
Cool. How do we think about feature testing when we're feature testing JavaScript on the front end? So we are going to be thinking about two kinds of things. So as I did an example yesterday, we drew this out together. Let's have a look at that interaction. So how did I model it yesterday? I did something like this, where we start off with some kind of web page. There's some kind of interaction that a user has with it, that we end up with this web page. Right, so this is always from the point of view from a user. So we hadn't yet mentioned the word user when thinking about feature testing from some of our definitions or descriptions just now. And that's mostly because, or likely because, we haven't really thought about a real interface to any of our projects so far. When we think about interfaces, I think I drew this out for everyone last week or the week before, but we think of any kind of application at the moment in three kinds of layers. So we have some kind of view layer, we have some kind of logic layer, and we have some kind of persistence layer. And for the past 2 weeks, we've really only been existing in this middle layer here. Right? We haven't worried about persisting any data, storing any data in a different part of our application or in a database somewhere. We haven't really worried about this one down here. And we won't worry about this one until a couple of weeks' time. All right, we've just been mainly focusing on how do we do object-oriented design in the logic layer. All right, how do we get our classes working together? How do we write methods? How do we think about behavior? How do we think about state? And what does good design look like? All right. However, today we're going to think about, or this week and next week, we're thinking about also this layer here. All right, this is what we can say like some kind of interface. How do people use our programs? We've been thinking about the command line as an interface. So we might have thought about a command line CLI interface to our programs. But for this week, we're going to be thinking about the web. All right, browsers that load our HTML, that interact with our JavaScript, and people can interact with our applications using a browser. So this is the layer that we're going to be thinking about. And given that we now have an interface, we can think about not just testing our logic, but testing the flow of someone who makes an interaction and has a corresponding change in the interface. So we have two kinds of approaches here. We can just test our logic using unit tests, which we've been we're quite familiar with now. Finding our subjects under test that we want to make sure have expected behavior. And we're going to be thinking about how do we make sure anyone who's interacting with our application has the right expected interaction. So we've been using Jasmine for this set of tests, and we're going to be using Cypress for this set of tests. These are two different frameworks that we're going to be using. So the purpose of today is just again to clarify what is the difference between a unit and a feature test, and how we can use Cypress to help feature test. Why do we even need it? This is going to be something that we're going to talk about by the end of this session. All right. So let's take a very simple interaction. Let's take it from the thermostat domain that you've all been working on yesterday. Let's imagine an example where we have a button on our page, and let's say click me. And what I want it to do is when I click this button, I want to see a temperature displayed in a number on the page. So we'll still have the button, doesn't go away. And I want to see, say, for example, I don't know, let's say it's now 22 degrees Celsius, if only. And we want to have an interaction like this. So from the point of view of the user, I don't care about what I name the classes, what kind of logic's happened. From the perspective of the user, all I want to do is to go to this page on the left, over here, number one, see those things on the page that I want, have an interaction. So this is some kind of button click, and then see the content on the page on the right. All right, so this is the kind of experience that a user will have. A very simple one, but again, we're trying to differentiate this between a unit test and a feature test when we're thinking about front-end applications. So there's no worrying about JavaScript, so instantiating objects or things like that. We're just going to be looking at the page, asserting there's things on there, making a click, and then seeing there's something different. All right. So with this context in mind, let's have a look at an example of this. So what I want you all to do when we get to the main phase of this is to make sure that you've updated this repository. So this is in the Modern Software Engineering Software Development 1 repository that you should probably have all cloned or forked and cloned, and just make sure your local copy is up to date, because there's been some new changes in here. So make sure your local copy of this repository is up to date. Navigate yourself to the workshops directory, and you'll see in here a directory called Feature Testing with Cypress. And this is where I want you to start. There's some instructions here about how to set it up. So inside of this working directory, you'll be able to make sure, as always, when you navigate there, install any of the project dependencies. And then you can see what it currently looks like. I've given you a very starter set for this exercise. I want you to be able to install dependencies and then have a look at what it currently looks like. So we can use the serve package to have a look at it. And then I want you to point your browser to localhost 5000. So let's do that together. Let's go back to here. So once you're in the working directory, and you can have a look at the instructions, make sure you install all of the dependencies the first time you go into any project, node project, and then let's have a look at it. I'm actually already running it, so it's chosen an additional port, but otherwise you can go to port 5000. So what does that mean? Well, you can just grab this URL and then open up in your browser. So if I grab this one and open up a new browser window, you can see what it currently looks like at the moment, just an empty page, right? But we're running it on localhost 5000. This is where any of your changes will appear. To run the tests, I want you to be able to run them in your browser. So after you run this command on your command line, then you can go to localhost 8888. So let's have a look at it. And we can see that we have 3 specs. We have a thermostat that can increase temperature by twice, can increase the temperature by 1, and it has a temperature. We can run our Cypress tests. Now, in order to run Cypress tests, Cypress essentially automates the role of a user. So if we go back to this diagram here, we need to automate the interactions of a user, which means we need to have the application running. All right, we can't automate someone interacting with the application if it's not running. So we need it to be running. In order to do that, we need to make sure before we run our Cypress tests that we start up our application. So this is important. Before you run your Cypress tests, you need to make sure that you're running the application itself, which means in a second window, in a second terminal shell, you need to run Cypress. And the way you do that is once you've installed it, all you need to do is use npx cypress open. It'll go through some setup. So it'll ask you, it'll check it. It might be the first time you run it, absolutely fine. And it will go through a setup process. Now, some of the common things are make sure you quit Google Chrome before you run it. It's less likely to lead to problems when you run Cypress for the first time. So make sure you quit any active window for Chrome before you run Cypress open. So after you run Cypress open, you'll get to a window that looks something like this, which will be quite fun. And then all you need to do is find, well, let's actually, I'll do this from the very beginning so you can see this. No, you need to stay open. So this is the command that I want everyone to run. npx cypress open once you've installed your dependencies and after you are running the application. Right? We can't use Cypress to automate being a user unless we're running the application. After we've done that, then we can go Cypress open and wait for it to do its magic. And it will bring us to this window. Then what we need to do is click on the test that you want to run, and it opens up a Chrome window and it gives you this lovely banner message saying Chrome is being controlled by automated test software. How fun is that? And then it does some things. It's all magic and gives you some information about this test message. And we're going to go find where these tests live in just a second. So a couple of things to point out. This is where you'll do most of your Cypress tests. You'll see the result of most of your Cypress tests. and you can see the things that it does. It goes in order and a number here about the steps of the test, and then gives you an error message. And we're going to go have a look at this in a second. If you want to rerun them, you click on this run all tests again. If you want to go find different tests to run, you go back to viewing all tests. And you can go have a look at different tests to run. So this is where you'll spend most of this week getting familiar with how to navigate within the Cypress test environment, this will be expected. So where do we get these tests from? Well, in your working directory here, let's go find it. You'll have a Cypress folder, and in the folder called integration, and it is important that it needs to be within this integration folder. It's where we get all the specs from. There is a spec called thermostat spec.js, and this is what your Cypress test will look like. Quite familiar. We have the same describe it syntax that we've been using with Jasmine. So it should be fairly straightforward to think about the convention of writing tests. We do exactly the same things. The only difference is where you're going to be using Cypress. So we're going to be using the object CY. This comes from Cypress. Allows us to interact with Cypress. And this is some of the simple assertions you can make using Cypress. So here we have an example of trying to automate the process of interacting with our application. So line 3 is visiting the index of our application. And line 7 says we want to be able to find this element on the page, and it makes an assertion that it should contain some text. So this is currently failing, as expected. And it gives us some information here that's saying expected to find the element welcome, because I told it, please Cypress, go find me the element welcome, but it didn't find it. So let's go have a look at why that's happening. So the first instruction for everyone, once you split up to go do it yourself, will be to make the first Cypress test pass by updating the assertion and adding an element to your HTML file to make it pass. So we'll do this together, and then you can go away and make sure Cypress is set up and do it for yourselves. So in this example, let's say let's add your welcome message here. Let's say something like, I don't know, hello, folks. You can update it whatever you want. And my assertion here is saying I want to find an element on the page, and it needs to have the text, hello, folks. All right, whenever you make any change in your test, you should always watch it fail first. So let's make sure it fails. Clearly it will fail because it still can't find the element welcome. So if it can't find the element welcome, always do the opposite of the error message. You can't find it, but we have to go create the element welcome. So let's go to our index.html. This is the file, HTML file that gets loaded by the browser. And so it's in here where we should add any information. So if I want to make that first stage of my Cypress test pass, I need to add an element with an ID of welcome. So let's make sure we can see this on the right-hand side. So focusing still on this line here, trying to think about, this is what I want to happen. I want to find the element with welcome, so I can write an element. Let's make it a bit bigger so we can see this. So I'm going to write an element. I'm going to give it an ID of welcome as expected. This is what it is saying I need to do. The hash the pound sign, whatever you want to call this, that specifies that it should be an ID welcome. All right, this is what we call a selector. When Cypress looks for this, it says, I want to find any element with an ID of welcome, which is what I've just done here. So if I leave this blank, let's go back to my Cypress test. I've done that first part. I'm going to run this again. And you can see here, we found the welcome, but it made the assertion, or it failed the assertion of saying it should contain this text, hello folks. So let's update the next part. Well, let's make it pass now. Ooh. Hello folks. And let's run this test again. And you can see here, I've got a passing test. All right. So it's still quite simple, quite straightforward, but this first phase I want everyone to go through is just to get familiar with how to start Cypress and how to navigate within the test result page, the summary, and having a look at how we can update our HTML to make our test pass. So this is what I want you all to do. We're going to go through this individually, and I will gather everyone back, and we'll go on to the next stage. All right, making the next second test pass. So I want to give everyone let's give everyone 20 minutes to see if, how far we get. I'll do another check to see how far we get if we need more time. And the instruction for everyone is to get yourself set up. Run the tests so you can see them, how they work, both the Jasmine test and the Cypress test. Make sure you're running the application, run your Cypress tests, and then make that first test pass. Then let's gather back on this Zoom at 10:20. All right, and then we'll talk about the next test. There are some resources down below if you want to have a look at some of the things we're talking about. Otherwise, that's all I wanted to say for the moment. Any questions before you all get on with this for the first part? Shakes the head. Any questions? Does it make sense what we're all going to start doing for the next 20 minutes? Cool. Nice thumbs up. All right. Away you go. Any questions, I'll be on Discord, or just jump back into this main Zoom. I think Ed and I are going to hang out and chat, so you just jump back in here if you want. Otherwise, see you in 20 minutes, right? Cool. Let me pause the recording. Okay, so we're going to be looking at this second test. So after you've got the first test to pass, you can remove the X. That means that it's a pending test. It won't give you a failure or a pass. And we can see this one fail. All right, so when you go on to the next stage, just get this to fail first by simply removing that X. All right, there's an X here. You can use X before any example to keep them pending. All right, so it doesn't actually run it. So sometimes it's useful just to focus on one test. Remember, you can also add F before an example to focus on specific examples. So let's remove the X from this one and go have a look at our set of tests. So our first test is passing and our second test is failing. All right. You can always click through the individual one and you can highlight the different steps to see what Cypress is doing. And when I have a look at this one, I make the request to the home page, and then I make a request to sort of get this element that has an ID of button. So let's understand what the test is trying to do. It says when button clicked, I want the temperature to increase by 1. All right. If we go back to our very quick interaction model over here, I want to be able to click and have the temperature displayed. All right. So this is what I'm trying to simulate as a user. So when button clicked, then the temperature increases by 1. So there might be a couple of different tests you could write to increase your confidence here. I'm trying to keep things simple so we can see what's happening. So the first stage is that button. So if it's trying to click on a button, we can see there's this click chained command here. So we want to find the element that has a button, and then it needs to be clickable. So there's a few different things you could do. You could anything that's clickable will be able to be supported by this click command, but for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to use a button. So let's add a button to the page. And and I don't really care about its name, so I'm going to remove it just to keep it simple. But what I want to do is make sure it's got an ID. My ID is going to be, given that I'm selecting it using the ID button, I'm going to call it button as well. What I wanted to say, I can say anything, but I think on my model it has something like click me. So let's go and have a look at my test running. I'm going to just refresh it. You can see that we got through to this stage, passed, and it just managed to get through it and go on to the next line. You can see the representation of your page on the right here, and I've got a button now on my page. Then it executes this click event, and you can see it hovers. If you hover over up, you can see this little red circle that says it found the clickable target and then executed the click. Then it had this assertion saying we should be able to find the element with the ID of message, but it never found it. All right, that's the assertion error here. So let's go ahead and add that into our page. Let's create an element for it. I'm going to give it an ID of message, because that's what my error message said. And I'm going to go back to my test and run it again. So it found the message, but then my assertion error said it expected to contain 21. So I'm at a point now where I've got the right things on the page, but there's no logic that says when I click on this, then execute some logic. All right, and that's something that should update the page. There's a starter for you if we have a look at these two files that get loaded into HTML. The first one is the thermostat object, which we're not touching. This has got a very simple class that has some initial state of a temperature with a value of 20, and then a function that increments it by 1 and returns the new temperature. Very simple. We're not going to touch this one, but what we're going to do is have a look at this other file to have a look at what this is doing. I've got some JavaScript here that says I'm going to create a new thermostat, and then I'm going to find the element on the page. We had a look at this yesterday. We can use the document API. We can access anything in the document, and then get access to the element with an ID of button. I'm going to store that in this variable, and then I'm also going to get the other element by ID of message. So if I have a look at it on the right here, I'm targeting these two elements. So what I want to say is when I click this button, I want to update this element. All right, there are two elements we need to target, and so we grab them from the page. And this is the code I want you to uncomment first of all. All right, so just uncomment it. And then we are using a function called add event listener. This is how we're going to hook into different events. We're going to do a simple one, which is just on the click event. That says, okay, when my button is clicked, execute this function. Again, we found the element on the page, button, because we've added it. We've found the thing that we want to update, which is the message. And then I use an event listener on the click event and say, okay, for my button, whenever you hear a click event, I want you to execute this function. And so we pass in the function as a second argument to my event listener. This is the event type, and this is what I want to happen. All right. So you've got to target the right event, the right element first. So any click events on my button, I then want to execute some code. And like we did yesterday, when the click event happens, update the inner text of the message element. So we have message as our element. We have inner text that we have access to. I want to update this to the increased temperature. I have access to my thermostat, starts up at 20. How do I increase it? It has an up function that increases it by 1 and then returns the new temperature. So thermostat dot up. If I invoke this function, it will return to me, it will increase the temperature and update it by 1. So the new thing here is thinking about this part here, all right, that I want you to go play with. And then we'll come back and discuss some questions about it. We're going to do some more work on this tomorrow about thinking about the flow of asynchronous code, all right? For now, for this session, uncomment it and add the line here that increases the thermostat temperature and then sets the text, the inner text of this element. And then have a look in your browser at how it works. All right, there's some comments here to help you along the way to make sure you're doing the right things, and then we'll gather back for a Q&A afterwards. When I've done this, we can go have a look at the tests, and we can see that the tests are passing, and you can sort of play around with it in your window as well. All right. So again, we're trying to keep things super simple at the moment, just understanding how the flow of using Cypress can drive our development from a feature test perspective. There's a couple of new things here that we'll keep having a look at tomorrow. And for now, let's have a good go at it, and we'll do a Q&A when you've had some chance to get this working. So the first step is to remove the pending here, see a failing test. Then look at each individual error message. You want to be able to add your button element, you want to add your message element, and then lastly, you want to go back to your interface.js file and uncomment these lines and add the right line here to make sure that you update the inner text property of your message element with the new temperature of your thermostat on every click. Cool. And this is step 4, make the second Cypress test pass. All right, quick Q&A. Any questions on what we're going to be doing for the next 15, 20 minutes? Everyone feel like they have something to do for the next 20 minutes? Quick thumbs up. Cool. All right, anyone who wants to go through the Cypress setup process, stay around on the Zoom and we can go through it together. All right, I think Sophia maybe and anyone else. All right, be back here in 20 minutes. I'll send another message out just to make sure if you need any more time. All right, have some fun. All right, anyone wants to go through setup questions?
Hi Ed. So I was able to get Cypress running, but it wasn't bringing up the thermostat spec.
Do you want to share your screen? Let's have a look at it together.
Yeah, one sec.
I'm actually going to pause the recording.